chats up. I'm not 100% sure if I'll see them because I've got to switch so many screens. But if you do want to send a quick comment through YouTube, please. So, the Patreon one, I don't know. We'll see. So, yeah, I think YouTube chats will work. So if you are on YouTube and you want to send through a chat, please go ahead. But what I'm here to talk about today is Canada, the federal government. They released their 2025 budget this afternoon, and I've had some time to go through it. Not a whole lot of time. It's 406 pages, I think, in and around there. But I'm only focusing on the First Nations Indigenous Services Canada piece, specifically around First Nations emergency management. And the reason that I wanted to take a quick peek because there's been a little bit of activity with ISK around making decisions such as moving the structural fire program out of community infrastructure over to the Emergency Management Assistance Program, or EMAP. They made that move, and I think I think I kind of see why they did that in the budget from a budget perspective, because it may not make a whole lot of sense from like a governance or structural or program delivery perspective, because typically lumping structural fire into emergency management, especially through the EMAP program, that just in discussions with Stacy and just what I've seen happen in governments before around structural fire and emergency management, it's usually a way to reorganize, to redistribute funding more than it is to actually improve anything. But time will tell, because we've seen a lot of times where structural fire has been lumped into EM or taken out, or EM's been responsible for fire, or fire's been responsible for EM, and it just always creates a lot of confusion about priorities, about who's doing what, things like that. So I'm predicting that the move of structural fire into community infrastructure was more of just a way for ISK to show that they've made a bit of a budget cut, maybe in community infrastructure, because they've got 2% that they have to cut from some areas or something like that. We'll go into it here. I just want to make sure that current game frame is 7.8 seconds. Pause incorrect. Sizes, please. Of 4 seconds or less. Okay, well, I did do the 4 seconds or less. But we'll put it at 4 and see how things come out on. Anyway, I'm going to get into a presentation here. What I did was I just cut out some key areas of the budget that I thought were important for First Nations, and I tried to keep the pages on here in case you want to see, where I'm getting this information from. One thing I'll show you actually that I wanted to do first is, let's see if that'll come up here. Just around the 2024 budget. So you can see here, fairness for every generation was the theme. It was really about family. It was really about growing the economy, homes, help make life cost less. They really branded the budget as fairness for every generation because, again, we're still coming off COVID. Food was expensive. housing is expensive. There's not enough homes. Very family focused budget. But this year, totally different. It's now very sort of sovereign based about the country. You've got branding around like an Arctic, potentially here an Arctic or ocean port. When you go through the budget, it's very building Canada strong. However, there's a lot of the same initiatives and programs that were in this Fairness for Every Generation around homes, reducing life costs, growing the economy. So obviously, what's going on south of our country has really sparked this idea to show that Canada is investing more in maybe defense, military, big infrastructure projects, things like that. So we'll see how that goes over, but definitely a big shift in the messaging, but maybe not a whole lot of shift in where the money's going. But anyway, so just to start off, in Indigenous Services Canada, I don't know, and if anybody does, and you can comment later. I want to hide that one. Hang on a second. Which one was that? This one. Nope. I'm going to just drag it over here. And then I'm going to get rid of it. And then I'm going to leave it there. So what I wanted to go through was if you've got insight or comments or feedback on the budget and what I'm about to say, please pass that through, even if it's live or later, because I'm not an expert on federal budgets, but I know enough to be dangerous. But what this is showing here is, a budget for ISK of $494 million that I didn't have time to go through this into what context that is, because last year the feds reported like 21 billion, and I think that was maybe around a lot of the multi-year projects they have going on. I don't think they haven't cut that much from ISK. But anyway, this is kind of all they're showing, and it's strange because if you look at other departments, ISK just has this one total. If you look at other departments, they've got several line items, but ISK, they just do it with one. So anyway, in terms of emergency management, I'm going to present some things here that also have to do with disaster risk reduction. So if you don't know what disaster risk reduction is, it's really just a policy that is established to undertake initiatives, programs, services that reduce disaster risk at a systemic level. So even though this slide here is about strategic partnerships, Indigenous capacity building, and consultation on nation building projects, because this is part of the major projects office infrastructure, this is seen as a potential disaster risk reduction policy piece. So funding money to bring forward those big sort of infrastructure projects through strategic partnerships initiative. And that could be for whatever. I think these nation building projects, I don't know what those will end up being, if these are the same ones that are being headed out of that centralized office that the government has set up. Highly likely, but they are putting money into that, and it is a disaster risk reduction piece. So just some more on that. I also threw these in here because, again, they have to do with disaster risk reduction. So, of course, the funding for access to clean water, supporting Indigenous housing and infrastructure. Again, it's just the government's way of, funding those things in a First Nation that adds to their improved social outcomes, which we know if a community, Indigenous or non-Indigenous, is healthy, they're less vulnerable. And so these are all, I kind of like to fit them under emergency management because they have to do with risk reduction. Same with the school food program. So they're making that permanent. I think there was $1 billion over 3 years, but they're making that permanent. Again, this is going to feed into that overall helping to make a community less vulnerable. Because again, if you have healthy children, healthy kids, then you've got a better chance at reducing your risk in a community from a social fabric, health fabric. Healthy communities are more resilient. All of that. So that's why, again, I kind of lump that on there. I don't know. I'm looking at, it seems like the YouTube one is going really slow, but hopefully we'll figure that out. If not, I'll have this recorded on Patreon. All right, now we're going to get right into the meat and potatoes of emergency management. So the other reason I'm doing this is because I know chief and councils don't have a lot of time on their hands to maybe sift through everything, and it can be difficult to put into context, and maybe elders or knowledge keepers, other community members, nation staff, maybe they don't have the time or maybe they just don't have the ability to kind of sift through it and sort of sync all of these things together that's going on with ISK, with emergency management specifically. So hopefully this is providing a little bit of value. But I wanted to bring attention to this one because it doesn't look good, but I want to explain it here because this is over the next this $706 million number. That was for 24-25. The $111 million number is 25-26. And then you've got the 4 years after that all at zero. So why is support for emergency management response and recovery on reserve showing $0? It's the first thing I'm going to explain. Second thing I want to explain, why is it gone from 706 down to 111? That's another big red flag. But how it works, so the emergency management response and recovery activities, this is EMAP, or the Emergency Management Assistance Program. This number is so big mainly because of, again, all the response and recovery costs from 24-25, which a huge chunk of that, probably I would have to say, a quarter of that could have been from a first Alberta-based First Nation that's going through a major wildfire recovery. They had a large piece of last year's budget for that recovery from the feds. I'm concerned at this $111 million number, and I'll preface this by the EMAP budget for response and recovery is not budgeted for year over year. That's why these are zero. So, however, ISK did have a baseline funding for EMAP of $28 million that was used for response and recovery for the whole country. I don't know why that $28 million is not showing here. That's something I've got to check into, because maybe they're reporting it under something else, or maybe they've gotten rid of that annual base funding as a way to show a cut. I'm not sure, but I would have expected these 4 zeros to at least say 28 million, because that's what EMAP starts with every year. At least that's what we were told, before this budget. My other concern with this 111 number is I'm surprised to see that this is so low given the 2025 wildfire response and recovery. Now, it could be low for several reasons. One, First Nations that had evacuations response and are currently in recovery have not yet submitted their estimates for um, like November through to the end of this fiscal year. So First Nations have until Q4 of a fiscal year to kind of provide some estimates of what they think their EMAP spending for response and recovery will be. If they haven't done that documentation and submission to ISK yet, my recommendation would be they get working on it now and have it ready for ISK by February. Or maybe a lot of nations have submitted that, and maybe they just have not accounted for some programs or some things that they could be eligible for, and it's just a low number and they're going with the bare bones, which is not their fault. The other piece of this could be, a lot of spending that is, I think probably what it is these numbers are not covering the current expenditure, because this is, they're still collecting numbers, they're still collecting documentation and data. And because they don't have a budget for response and recovery year over year, ISK may not be looking at reporting a budget for 2025-26 next fiscal year until they have all that documentation and information in, because what ISK has to do for response and recovery funding that goes over their internal budget or the money that they have or can access, they of course have to go to Parliament, to Treasury Board to request those funds. So there's a couple things going on here, and if ISK is planning to sort of not report funding to show that ISK's budget kind of reduces, that's them playing with their numbers. It can be good news for First Nations, because this looks worse than it actually could end up being. The other risk there is nations have not submitted the reporting that ISK needs yet to create those budgets, or nations are missing out on providing recovery-based programs and services to their community, and they haven't maybe thought of the things yet or presented them to ISK. There's a lot of things going on. It depends on where each nation is, but this is for the previous year. This 111 is really low to me. The next 4 years at 0 is a little odd. These are just some things we're going to be digging in at HazardScape to kind of figure out what ISK's plan is. And if you do have insight and information on this, please comment, let me know. Send us an email to support@hazardscape.com. But yeah, very interesting. So lots going on there. This one here, strengthening Canada's emergency management. Funding to Natural Resources Canada. This is not necessarily in First Nations primary thing, but it kind of just, I think I've got on the next slide here. Yeah, they're putting $258 million, so $64 million over the next 4 years to lease 4 aircraft to bolster provincial and territorial aerial firefighting capacity. It looks good. I have no data or information to suggest that 4 aircraft is a healthy number or not. It seems low to me, given that this is for the entire country. And then, yeah, $64 million year over year for those 4 aircraft. I mean, the cost is what it is. I don't know what aircraft they're talking about. I don't know where they're going to be stationed or staged. I don't know what the process through Natural Resources Canada is to call on these aircraft. I imagine it's going to have to be a government to government, provincial or territorial request. Can First Nations make the request for these? Possibly, but maybe they've got to jump through CERNAC or ISK, or do they go through their province or territory? I don't know. How are they going to make decisions on where these aircraft are assigned? I mean, it's going to be based on life safety decisions, but I mean, if you've got a non-Indigenous community and an Indigenous community, the same population, and there's only one plane, how's that decision made? Is Canada still going to base some of their decision making on economic viability of the community like they've done in the past? So if a First Nation is very remote and Canada doesn't think that they contribute as much to the economic viability of the region as, say, a large municipality, you know, how are they going to distribute this? I don't know what the process is. That will be something interesting to see. But 258 million going to that. Renewing Canada's national public alerting system, potentially for First Nations, this will be a positive. I don't think the uptake of public alerting systems on reserve, I don't know the numbers. I don't have the data. But as we know, so many First Nation communities, remote, they experience cell service outages all the time, power outages all the time. You know, how hopefully some of this money is going to go to bolstering even cell service in remote northern communities. I don't know. Don't have the answer. But again, within Public Safety Canada, I think that's where this money is going to be managed. So we'll see. But just thought I would throw that in there because it could affect Indigenous communities. That's all I have for now. That's all I've been able to digest and take a look at. I know that the Minister of ISK recently also said that they're funding 300 First Nations on reserve emergency management coordinators. I don't know if they are funding them currently and that's what's being funded, or are they only funding 100 and they expect to fund another 200 this year or next few years? I don't know. I would say if you're a First Nation and you don't have an emergency management coordinator, you should be asking your regional ISK office about how to access that funds and whether, you know how long is it going to be available, things like that. But it's an interesting budget. There was I thought I had a piece here. I'm just going to go back through the slides because I saw a note where it says ISK has to reduce 2% of their funding, and it might have been in the larger PDF, and I can pull that up because I did think that was interesting, and that's kind of what I was thinking about in terms of ISK, moving the structural firefighting program over to EMAP. It probably doesn't, but it was kind of a thought of mine. This bring up the full PDF. That is not the full PDF. The full PDF is massive. Budget 2025. Go. Okay, I'm going to I'll put it on the screen here. there was a lot of other stuff too in the budget, but I think for First Nations specifically, what they really need to be focusing on is the current emergency management assistance program funding that they're getting, especially if they were evacuated. If they were evacuated or this summer, because I just suspect that a lot of them are missing out on some funding, or they're going to miss out on it if they don't get their documentation and some of their business cases in for what they do need. Let's just see if I can find my screen back here. I'm in the big budget here. I'm just going through looking for Indigenous Services Canada, because they talked about a 2% cut. No, I don't know where exactly. I should have screenshot that one. But I just have this sneaking suspicion that somehow ISK was able to like pull structural firefighting programming out of community infrastructure, put it into EMAP, and just do some accounting there. But that's totally I have nothing to support that, so don't take my word for it. But I can't find where they put. Let me just see if they do fire service. Yeah, on reserve. Let's see what. It's probably too much, but I'll have to take a look at that and push it out through another channel. So just stay up to date on the Hazardscape social media channels, and you'll see some more information come out about these budgets, because overall, the other thing I was going to say was a lot of the sort of general disaster management, emergency management spending in this budget is really allocated under military. In defense, doesn't mention civil defense or anything like that, but I suspect that maybe more northern Arctic, north of 60 First Nations may see some of that money flow from sort of this idea of sovereign, safe Canada under its defense spending going up north, where some of that will trickle down into emergency management programs. I don't know for sure, but that could be a path for Canada to flow funding through military line items into communities. But I don't have any knowledge on that. I'm just kind of looking at the budget. It's only been out for about 5 hours. I think I just kind of pulled it up and scanned it really quickly to find some things that were off the hop interesting, but little underwhelmed overall with this budget in terms of emergency management, especially for First Nations. I think it's already hard enough for nations to navigate Canada's funding agreements and grant programs for things that the daily things they need, like water, housing, administration. But to sort of, keep emergency management buried a little bit or put under the military, or sort of you just talk about it in the context of response and recovery, and sort of leave out anything around preparedness, like the only thing mentioned around preparedness is emergency preparedness systems which serve national defense. and national security purposes. They're really going to take a look at public safety, not Public Safety Canada, I forget, emergency preparedness and resilience, whatever they're calling that ministry these days. They're really taking an organizational look at that. They're cutting some jobs, doing an org structure. I don't know what that means in terms of reducing the resources within that ministry. Yeah, it's going to work to become a leaner, more efficient department to better serve Canadians. I don't know what that means, but again, no preparedness to do with First Nations. Also, if we look at mitigation, like again, mitigation, I kind of just search for these words just to see where they pop up. Advancing the Youth Climate Corps. Okay, that's good news. I don't know if there's an equivalent for Indigenous peoples or not. But mitigation preparedness, not mentioned as much, but look at response. I mean, response to threats. Holy, 37. Response comes up 37. I know you can't see it, but it's like there's just so much emphasis placed on response, and it doesn't even matter if it's response to like the tariffs or response to, I don't know, too much dust in the air, response to whatever. It's just response. We're responding. That just tells me our, even recovery here. Recovery is mentioned 11 times in this. Canada Recovery Benefits, recovery activities on reserve. Yeah, it's not necessarily climate emergency and recovery. What is that? So this is the Youth Climate Corps again. This measure would benefit young people through additional employment and or training opportunities in support of climate emergency and recovery response, as well as climate resilience across the country. I hope this includes Indigenous youth. That I'm going to have to take a look at. But climate emergency and recovery response, as well as climate resilience. See, again, it's like response, recovery. Not much on preparedness, not much on mitigation. That's all. So it's really interesting that culture. Oh, I just got a text here. Search recovery planning or response planning. Well, I think probably not, because it's a keyword. It's not. I don't think that's a term that they're going to talk about specifically. Yeah, I mean, we could even just look at planning. Lots of planning. Fiscal planning. It's all fiscal planning. Planning horizon. But again, it's like, I just don't know why Canada is so obsessed with response and recovery. Yeah, there's not going to be planning in that EM context. So it's that was again one of the big things that I always notice, right, is where are they using those words? And again, it's all in this military kind of preface, which, even I was just watching on LinkedIn. I saw on LinkedIn today, Incident Command System Canada was doing a handover to 9 agencies who I think are adopting their incident management training so they can better prepare people in their regions or their staff. They only mentioned municipalities, provinces, territories, and humanitarian groups. I don't think there was First Nations in that handover. I did comment on LinkedIn if they plan to include or roll that out to First Nations, but I don't. I'll be surprised if they actually provide an answer. Um, yeah, it's kind of. I just don't expect much of a response. But hey, we're gonna get $258 million for 4 airplanes. That just I don't even like. I don't like. How was that decision even made? No, Stacy, I'm not searching. No, that's inappropriate. My colleague Stacy Dorr um, is texting me while I'm on this, and he's asking me to search in the budget for very inappropriate things, and I'm not, even though they could be in there. Yeah, $258 million for airplanes. Like, oh my gosh, come on. Meanwhile, $706 million for response and recovery, and that 706 is mostly recovery. Canada would prefer to let things burn, respond to it, and then pay for everything to be fixed later and rebuild later. Like, as a strategy, response and recovery is horrible as strategies. I mean, they're needed because you'll never mitigate 100% of everything. You can't prevent 100. There has to be response and recovery, but we know we could prevent and mitigate a lot. That's 706 million. And the number before that year, I think, was hitting around 800 million. Yeah, I just know of some specific cases where that number did not even need to be close to 800 million because Canada didn't invest a mere $300,000 in some well-needed fire breaks. But now, hey, we're going to have access to 4 leased planes, and I don't even know if we're going to have an option to buy them. And if we do, what's the maintenance? But anyway, again, that's the budget. We'll keep digging into some things. We'll do some updates. If you are following us on our Patreon, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, we will have some of those updates provided through those channels. So keep an eye out for them. And thanks for tuning in.